Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, whatever you want to call it. Friends, this program is Common Sense Islamic Values. There are 20 Islamic values that contribute to the common humanity and the betterment of its societies. And let me share, today's is a very big topic, and Brother Safi Kaskas and I have tried to cut it down as much as we can. Let me introduce the topic. Equality is the mother of all values in Islam. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, may be the first man in human history to restore gender equality and liberated women from the tyranny of men that existed in the past. He worked on gradually ridding of the slavery, which we are going to have a special topic with Brother Kaskas. Indeed, equality permeates in every aspect of Islam, particularly the Islamic rituals. Men and women are equal in the eyes of God. There are verses from 3:195, 33, 35. Men and women are each other's garments, that is, protectors, defenders, secret keepers, and the soulmates. On the day of judgment, each individual is responsible for his and her actions. God is not going to ask a woman or a man, did you obey what the man said or woman said? Or did you do what they did instead? They said, did you stood up for what is right in Islam? And that is what they will be asked. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his last sermon on March 6, 632 AD, Safi, you may connect with March that you are holding this seminar. March 6, 632 AD, he had said, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. And the summary of his statement was that all are equal and no one is privileged more than the other. 1144 years later, Thomas Jefferson wrote in the immortal Declaration of our Independence that all men are created equal. Their Creator endows them with certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Such is the power of equality in Islam. And now let me share a few more thoughts. I'll be introducing Brother Kaskas in a few minutes. And I was recently watching a video clip of Muhammad Ali. A teenage girl from the audience asks him why he chose Islam. He says, in his humorous ways, it was the equality factor and elaborates on the idea of equality that appealed to him to become a Muslim. He noted that among Muslims, he does not feel rejected or does not have to sit in the back of the bus or drink water from their different fountain. He was talking about the 60s. Most of the untouchables in South Asia who chose Islam would say the same. Prophet Muhammad was crystal clear with his message. Each one of us is responsible for our action. A husband is not responsible for the moral or faith actions of wife and vice versa. No individual can ever blame the imam or the religious leader for their acts. They are responsible. Get this, even Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would not help you on the day of judgment or the day of the accountability. And he showed the way. The right way earns you peace and the wrong way earns you discomfort, or what we may call it, hell. Just give me a second. You are one on your own. Take responsibility for your actions. He said that even to his daughter in the Islam, the value of, and that is why my mother told me when I was a kid, such is the emphasis placed on equal access to God's grace. The Quran recognizes that men and women are endowed with the qualities. Surah 4, verse 32, and 434 verses listed below. Because of the unique attributes, men and women share different responsibilities. It does not mean they are not equal. Despite such unique qualities, men and women are equal in the eyes of God. So it is very important we talk about it. Now let me introduce Dr. Safi Kaskas, who will talk about from the Quran, is an expert on Quran. Dr. Safi Kaskas is a management executive and a strategist. And a strategist with more than 40 years of experience. For this particular program, he has co-authored the Quran with references to Bible, a contemporary understanding, a new never completed translation of the Quran into contemporary English, featuring more than 3,000 parallel references to Bible. So, Brother Kaskas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ma. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Our subject is equality in Islam. Traditional scholars of Islam claim that we shouldn't call Islam a religion of equality, despite what Mike was saying, but a religion of equal justice. They point out that the obvious fact that while we are all created in a similar way as human beings, yet we are all different. They claim that equality does not exist on earth. For life to continue, they explain you need the talented and the less talented, the genius and the mediocre, the wealthy and the poor, etc. They make sure to point out that Allah did not distribute the inheritance equally among the relatives. He gave the son more than he gave the daughter, yet he made the son obligated to provide for his wife and children. This is how Islam reached true equality in a society, they say. The Sharia is where you find all these rulings that differentiate between man and woman. However, we are living witnesses nowadays to a revolution in family laws around the Muslim world. This revolution is proceeding fairly quietly, but it is very obvious to the interested observer. Other Muslims claim that equality is an article of faith in Islam. It should be taken seriously, they say, by every Muslim, and to which a Muslim must adhere very seriously. The foundation of the Islamic value of equality are deeply rooted, they tell us, in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Equality stems from basic principles such as the following. All human beings are created by the same creator, Allah, the supreme Lord of all. 2, all human beings belong to the same human race and are all descendants of Adam and Eve. 3, Allah is absolutely just and kind to all of us. He is not partial to any race or a national entity. The whole universe is his dominion, and all people are his subjects. Number 4, all people are born equal in the sense that no one brings any possession with him, and they die equal in the sense that they take back nothing of their worldly belongings. Number 5, Allah has conferred dignity on all human beings. Number 6, Allah judges every person on the basis of his own merits and according to his own deeds. These are the claims and the counterclaims, and the truth is found somewhere in between. Equality among people on earth is not the norm. Human beings will not be equal as far as opportunity, wealth, and their contribution to human civilization on this planet. Total and absolute equality exists only when we are all standing in front of our Creator on the day of judgment. Hence, we will talk about the principle of equality in relationship to Allah on one hand and the Sharia and gender on the other. This is what I will be talking about.
It is
equality versus Allah and equality versus what the Sharia teaches and what it says specifically about gender.
Yes.
And we will discuss the principle of equality versus equity in Islam. These are two different principles. But before I go any further, I want to frame this issue in today's time and place. Let's all get used to take context in consideration. What I will say apply to the situation today. How about 50 years from now? Will things be the same? I don't think so. It is all up to you and I, and whether we intend what we intend to do for our voice to be heard. Think about it. What you do today might affect future generations. Equality in the eyes of Allah. This is the first part of this presentation. The only distinction among people that Allah recognizes is the distinction in taqwa. Taqwa, we said before, is a concept that means God consciousness, or also to be in awe of Allah. But I usually use it in the sense of God consciousness. And the only criterion that Allah applies is the adherence to His guidance. Allah Almighty says in the Quran, people, we created you from a male and a female and made you nations and tribe so that you may know one another. I prefer the word so you may engage one another. The best among you in the sight of God is the one who is most mindful of God. God is all-knowing and all-aware. The differences of gender, race, color, or social status are only a test to human beings. They do not affect the true stature of a human being in the sight of Allah. The Quran says, we have assigned each of you a law and a way of life. If God had wanted, He could have made you all a single community. But instead, He is testing you by means of what He has revealed to you. So compete in doing what is good. You will all return to God, and He will clarify these matters about which you have differed. That's chapter 5, verse 48. Prophet Muhammad said, people, your Lord is one, and your Father is one. You all descended from Adam, and Adam was created from dust. The most honored among you in the sight of God is the most God conscious. Actually, the Prophet here is explaining that verse that we've read.
And this
No
is a
Arab
hadith.
is superior to a non-Arab. No colored person to a white person, or a white person to a colored person, except by taqwa, God consciousness. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, who among people are most loved by Allah? He replied, the most loved by Allah are the most beneficial to other people. This is how we are versus Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In His eyes, we are all equal. No gender, no race, nothing. We're equal in the way He created us. But then each one of us is responsible for his own deeds, the deeds we decided to do with our free will. Now I'm going to talk about equality in Islamic Sharia. Certainly, people are equal in Islam regarding their rights to life, property, and human dignity, regardless of their religion, race, gender, or ethnicity. All people are equal in basic rights and duties. Having said this, the hyper-focus on equality to the exclusion of other concepts related to justice can obscure the truth of the matter. There are two words for justice in Islam. Adl, which comes from the root meaning to be equal, and qist, meaning to be equitable. In English, these terms correlate to equality and equity, and they reflect different but complementary notion of justice. Many times, an equal distribution is not an equitable distribution, and therefore it produces injustice. The Quran uses these two words together to make this point. Allah said in the Quran, believers, stand firm by equity, qist, as witnesses for Allah, even if it were against yourselves, or your parents, or your relatives. Whether rich or poor, Allah is more worthy of both. Follow not your desires so that you may be just. This is Surah 4, verse 135. This verse has the foundation of the concept of justice in Islam. Our standards of justice should be the same for everyone, regardless of social status, race, religion, ethnicity, gender, and so on. We should not be biased toward our own groups or even our own selves in the administration of justice. Al-Qurtubi, a Muslim scholar of the past, comments on the latter verse saying, this verse shows that the unbelief of the unbeliever does not prevent us from offering him justice. The unbelief of the unbeliever does not prevent us, Muslims, from offering him justice. However, it is not always true that setting two things equal to each other produces justice. To make the long story short, if you say Allah, God, was equal to the idols that were worshipped by Quraysh, you're saying they're equal, but that doesn't make them equal. All praise is due to Allah, the Quran says, who created the heavens and the earth and made darkness and light, yet those who disbelieve claim equals with their Lord, claim their idols to be equal with their Lord. In this verse, the same word uses to mean justice elsewhere is here used to mean setting up idols as equal to God. To claim the Creator is equal to the creation is obviously unjust. As such, equality is not always the same as justice. Allah said, and in their properties is a right for the needy and deprived. Chapter 51, verse 19. The poor are entitled to receive enough charity for them to meet their basic needs, while it is a duty upon the wealthiest of us to give them charity. This arrangement is not equal, but it is equitable and produces justice. In our times, it is becoming less clear to people how equality and equity relate to gender issues in Islam. To be sure, men and women are generally equal in rights, duties, dignity, except in the few cases in which an equal arrangement would not be equitable. We will examine that. Allah said, the believing man and woman are allies of one another. Chapter 9, verse 71. And he also said, their Lord respond to them, never will I cause to be lost the deeds of any among you, whether male or female, you are of one another. In other words, whether the deed is done by a male or done by a female, Allah is taking good counts of that deed, and the male and the female will have equal reward for the same deed. This is in chapter 3, verse 195. Sayyida Aisha radiallahu anha reported, the messenger of Allah, peace and blessing be upon him, said, verily women are the counterparts of man. These texts indicate that man and woman in Islam are equal as a general rule, with few exceptions related to physiology or traditional gender roles. For instance, men have historically been the heads of their households because they were responsible for providing the food, for taking care of the households. Allah said, husbands have charge of their wives with the wealth God has given to some over others and with what they spend out of their wealth. Surah An-Nisa, which is number 4, verse 34. A traditional scholar will explain this verse this way. The favor of man over woman refers to the physical strength of man, which is on average much greater than woman, and which enables man to better perform the hard physical labor and military duties necessary for political and economic security. This is how a traditional scholar will explain why man should be preferred or above woman in rank. In return for fulfillment their duties, women should reasonably obey the limited authority of their husbands. In a superficial sense, the marriage relationship is unequal because rights and duties are distributed differently, but the distribution is designed to be balanced and equitable. The same principle applies to the law of inheritance. Allah said, Allah enjoins you regarding your children. For the male, one share like two females. This is in Surah 4, verse 11. Again, a superficial reading.
Friends, you are tuned into Islamic values, common sense Islamic values. Today's topic is equality of men and women and men, races and gender. And Dr. Safiq Askas is citing Quran, and he is equally sharing the traditional view and also what it can be. So there are two points he's pointing out. I think one of the last things he said was God gives equal reward for the same deed to both men and women.
Absolutely.
And also at the beginning, he said, the true equality is when all people stand in front of God in day of judgment, and each one is equally, have the equal rights and equal responsibility. And of course, he has cited many verses in between. And thank you for sharing these extraordinary values.
Mike, the point that we all need to focus on, total equality, absolute equality between all human beings, regardless of gender, regardless of color, regardless of race. When it comes to God, it's guaranteed.
Yes.
God sees all of us as equal. This is not the problem, though. This equality we will experience on the day of judgment after we die.
Yes.
But here on earth, we have our Sharia, and our Sharia was interpreted in a certain way. That certain way on the surface shows as if it is not equitable, but in fact, it doesn't have equality necessarily, but it has equitability.
Yes, yes.
The Quran gave us an example.
Yes.
It says, Allah enjoins you regarding your children. For the male, one share like two females. Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse 11. Again, a superficial reading might mislead some people into thinking this arrangement is unjust because it is unequal.
Yes.
But the inequality of the arrangement is counterbalanced by the added responsibility of the male to provide income for his family. Thus, the distribution is unequal but equitable.
Yeah. In fact, when you were talking about this, I was thinking we need to take it to the Congress. They are not passing the bill, equal pay for equal work, men and women. That bill has been pending for a long time. Somehow, I don't know why our congressmen and senators don't get in their head, but we need to quote the Quran that equal pay for equal work.
Absolutely. The problem Muslims are experiencing in today's world is that traditional gender roles and economic arrangements have been severely disrupted by modernity. Some people call for the application of classical Islamic law in a new social context that might produce equitable outcomes, while others call for the abandonment for all Islamic law altogether. Ibn al-Qayyim, a Muslim scholar, wrote several hundred years ago, Allah Almighty has made clear in His law, Sharia, that the objective is the establishment of justice between His worshippers and equity among the people. So whichever path leads to justice and equity is part of the religion and can never oppose it. Actually, when a scholar like Ibn al-Qayyim, who lived several hundred years ago, see that the ultimate purpose of all Sharia laws is to bring justice or to equal distribution or equity.
Equity, yes.
Yeah, then there is no doubt that this is the intent of the Quran. It's the way we interpret it that makes a difference.
I fully agree with that.
This reality forces a difficult conversation upon Muslims about achieving equitable results in the modern context within a traditional Islamic framework. Islam as a religion does not need to be reformed, but the legal principles, our jurisprudence, need to adapt to changing conditions. This principle already exists in the classical heritage. We need to courageously renew our jurisprudence again in the quest for a well-ordered, just society. The Sharia gender problem. In an article written by Mark Fathi Masoud, University of California, Santa Cruz, the writer-researcher said, Sharia is often portrayed as a barbaric and particularly regressive in terms of women's rights. Citing Sharia lawmakers in some Muslim majority countries have punished theft with amputation and sex outside of marriage with stoning. Women have been also forced to stay in abusive marriages and flogged for denying Sharia because they were wearing trousers. By the way, when trousers for men started, turn of the last century, Sharia scholars said it is haram, illegal. Men should not wear trousers, they said. Things changed. Commonly translated as Islamic law, Sharia is a broad set of ethical principles found in the Quran and in the teaching and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. It's not a strict legal code, leaving it open to varying interpretations by government and religious leaders. However, many Muslim women do not regard Sharia as being incompatible with their rights. My research, the writer is saying, shows how women, typically small activist group in many countries, are using Sharia to fight against oppressive practices. In his article titled Sharia and Women's Rights, the author, Mark Fathi Masoud, a professor of politics and legal studies, University of California, Santa Cruz, wrote, I interviewed nearly 150 women's rights activists, religious leaders, officials, and aid workers over the past decade in Somalia and Somaliland, where more than 99% of the population is Muslim. The region has suffered cycles of famine and drought, as well as a brutal dictatorship and civil war that led to the collapse of Somalia's government 30 years ago and the split between Somalia and Somaliland. I wanted to learn, he said, why women were demanding Sharia and whether Sharia could help rebuild societies after a war. My book, Sharia, Inshallah, Finding God in Somali Legal Politics, tells the story of peace builders and peacemakers oriented toward rather than away from Sharia. Those people he's talking about are oriented toward Sharia, not away from it. Women activists I met saw an inherent feminism in Sharia. Muslims can find support for almost everything in Sharia, a Somali activist reminded me. It's just that women have to know their rights in the Quran, she added. These activists help their local communities understand women's rights in Islam. For example, one activist fighting for girls' education explained to local parents how Sharia demands that both boys and girls have the right to education. Billboards put up by human rights groups referred to the Islamic teaching that to educate a girl is to educate a nation. They emphasize that Prophet Muhammad himself taught women and men and encouraged his followers to do the same. Another activist I talked with invoked Sharia to explain that girls should be allowed to play sports. She explained to parents that not allowing their daughters to play goes against Sharia, which gives rights to human beings, not to men, not to women, to human beings. Yet another called the Quran, one of the sources of Sharia, her guide to persuade women to run for public office, allowing women to stand for election she publicly insisted is Islamic. Patriarchy and interpretation. Part of the problem with the often brutal interpretation of Sharia has been that men have been aligning it with their political views. The custodians of law are men. And an aid worker told me, reclaiming woman power. Religious leaders in those countries have, however, been reluctant to speak publicly on these issues. But many of the Somali women I met were reviving a century-old tradition of women teaching and interpreting Sharia. Interpreting in the 7th century, Aisha radiallahu anha, we quoted her before, the Prophet Muhammad's surviving spouse, was among the first Muslim authorities to render decisions on sacred law that man had to follow. Not just in Somalia and Somaliland, but in many parts of the world, Muslim women are reclaiming their rights by studying and sharing Quranic verses and prophetic teachings. In Malaysia, for example, groups like Sister in Islam and Musawa have been publicly putting forward feminist interpretation of Quranic verses to teach women about gender equality and inheritance rights.
That is such a good thing. I welcome that.
Listen to the rest. There are much more.
Okay.
In Egypt, women have invoked Sharia to expand access to divorce. In many research in Sudan, I saw women lawyers teach women displaced by civil war that their right come from God. On the day of judgment, they tell each other, these women said to one another, God will judge those who try to take away women's God-given rights.
Wow, powerful.
And in Los Angeles, California, a women's mosque offers women-led sermons, classes, and events. By interpreting theological and legal texts in less patriarchal ways, these women, as I found, are shattering age-old sexist interpretation of Sharia. What is happening in today's world as far as reforming Sharia around the world? The family life aspects of the Sharia have been radically transformed in Morocco. A new family code called Al-Mudawwana was unanimously adopted by the Moroccan parliament in February. The new law is a landmark reform of the status of Moroccan women, has changed the traditional Sharia rules on marriage, divorce, inheritance, polygamy, and child custody. The resulting family code establishes that women are equal partners in a marriage, allows women to contract marriage without legal approval of a guardian, outlaws verbal divorce, allows women to claim alimony and the custody of the child, and raises the minimum age for women's marriage from 15 to 18, the same as for men, which is 18 years old. In Indonesia, the new Islamic intellectualism movement aims to separate the Sharia from the political realm and argues that the higher objectives of the Sharia should be used to promote civic society and participatory and accountable governance from the grassroots with full participation of all members of society. In an important paper titled Islamic Law and Gender Equality.
Friends, you're listening to the program Common Sense Islamic Values, the values that contribute to the general goodness of the society. And today's topic is very big one. We can probably do 2 or 3 hours on this. It is about equality in Islam. It is hugely emphasized on it. And Dr. Kaskas has been talking about quoting from the Quran. And now he's also sharing what's happening in terms of gender equality in Malaysia, Indonesia, Egypt, and continue, please.
In an important paper titled Islamic Law and Gender Equality, could there be a common ground? A study of divorce and polygamy in Sharia law and contemporary legislation in Tunisia and Egypt. Mind you, we talked about a general impression of the world. Then we talked about someone reporting from Somalia, asking women why are they using Sharia to get
Yes.
more rights.
Yes.
And now we're talking about an academic paper about whether we can, reconcile Sharia and women's rights and have common ground. This paper is written by Amina Mashour and published in Human Rights Quarterly. The author, who is a known academic researcher and activist, wrote, "This paper seeks to address whether or not there could be a common ground between applying Islamic Sharia law and gender equality through an examination of the textual Sharia rulings regarding polygamy and divorce, a comparison of this theoretical framework with the applied laws in Egypt and Tunisia, and finally, an attempt to show the relationship between the divine text, jurisprudence, and the role of ijtihad." See, it's like a tripod.
Yes.
The first leg of the tripod is the divine text, which is the Quran. The second is jurisprudence, what we people understand Allah to be saying, and we put it in a form of a law. And the role of ijtihad, this is our role in continuously improving and modernizing old ruling or old ways of looking at what Allah said and what we understood from them. It's important to understand this. The paper argued that the deterioration of women's rights in many Islamic countries had nothing to do with their Islamic nature, but rather with their patriarchal nature.
Cultural.
Islam introduced a number of revolutionary rights to women at the time of revelation. Therefore, the spirit of the Quran points toward ultimate equality between the sexes in a gradual process, similar to the case of slavery.
Yes.
As the Quran puts great emphasis on the right to seek justice and the duty to do justice, and because the first aim of Sharia is to maintain justice and defend public welfare, all means to achieve justice and public welfare are Islamic in nature. The dynamic nature of Islamic teachings, the evolving character of Sharia, the spirit of Islam toward women's rights, the principles of justice and public welfare, and the essentiality of feminist ijtihad leave no room for doubt that a common ground could be found between Islamic law and gender equality. Now we come to the conclusion. Equality on the day of judgment is guaranteed by Allah. However, equality between human beings on earth is impossible. Where equality is not possible, the Quran used the value of equity to replace equality. Muslims in general have a problem with the Sharia law that did not adapt yet to modern times. We can solve this problem by listening to Ziauddin Sardar, a writer, broadcaster, cultural critic, and professor of law and society in Middlesex University and co-editor of Critical Muslim. He wrote an article called Islam and Religious Thought. He concluded the following: a more contemporary, humane, and inclusive interpretation of the Quran that is widely accepted by the majority of Muslim people would move Islam away from ossified tradition and toward a vision of justice, equality, and beauty that is rooted in the sacred text. So his starting point is from a contemporary translation of the Quran, basically.
That's your specialty.
That's what we're working on at this time.
Yes.
Number two, a reformulated Sharia based on higher objectives would reinvigorate Muslim societies and resolve many social, political, and cultural issues. Number three, the work of reformist academics, as with most academic thoughts, would influence the coming generations who will be more willing and motivated to rethink problematic aspects of Muslim societies and develop viable solutions. Last point, if these trends reach take-off points, they could have transformative effect and the future will not repeat the recent past. This is basically my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Dr. Kaskas, thank you so much. We had a presentation, my friends, on equality as Islam defines as equity of genders, of human beings, and it is such a good program. I hope those who will ever watch on the YouTube and Facebook will share this with their friends. It answers a lot of questions about Islam. Now we open the floor to our friends to ask any question they want. You can raise your hand or we will see who wants to talk. You can unmute and speak.
Thank you. The discussion about men and women's relationship was particularly interesting to me. Correct me if I am wrong, but it's my understanding that Muhammad, peace be upon him, his wife was like a very successful businesswoman.
Yes.
And was fairly wealthy.
Yes.
I must believe that in a situation where her expertise may have exceeded his in some particular matter, probably would have meant that Muhammad would have ceded to her authority and her strength in that respect. Would I be mistaken about that?
No, you're not. As a matter of fact, Muslims don't discuss this often.
Yes.
But in fact, Sayyida Khadija, that's her name, Khadija.
Khadija.
Sayyida Khadija, yes, was a wealthy merchant. And she was from a very good family. Her family were followers of Jesus. I won't call them Christians because Christianity is what we know today. At that time, it wasn't called that. And probably they were, following Arius.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, yes, she asked for his hand in marriage. Do you see the difference here? Mm-hmm. Usually, a man go and ask for the hand of woman in marriage. In this case, Khadija asked Muhammad for his hand in marriage, and he accepted.
She took the lead.
He took the lead. He was actually working for her, and he was known to be trustworthy, and he was known to be a humanitarian, and she loved him because of these qualifications. But in fact, although in his biography, we don't have a biography for Khadija, his wife, but we have a biography for him. From everything I've read about their life, she never disobeyed him, but he always consulted with her. The day he received the first revelation, he was on top of a mountain that I climbed also. My wife and I climbed together. And we had Sam Shropshire with us. Sitting on top of that mountain, to come down is a major operation. That day, when Muhammad received the first revelation, he stumbled down. He fell down. He didn't know how he's getting down and ran straight to his house, and he was trembling. Where did he go? To his wife, Khadija. If he did not respect her opinion very, very much, he would have sought advice of someone else. But because she was the most important person for him in his life, he went to her. And he told her what happened. And he told her, I'm afraid I was taken over by a devil or by Satan or by somebody. I don't know who came to me, but I was actually, like paralyzed. I wasn't able to do anything. And I'm afraid that an evil force is taking over me. She said, never. She didn't think about it. She didn't have to give it a second thought. She said, never. Your Lord will never let you down. You feed the hungry. You bring together those who need love and need compassion. So he will never let you down.
And it
That's
is
the
also,
kind of wife that you and I and anybody reasonable would listen to. You know?
and also that is very important in building trust between the family members, husband and wife, to believe what one says instead of rejecting it. And she did a great thing. And Michael, I think that was a turning point. She believed him, and that was important.
She became the first Muslim in history. The next morning, she went and got her cousin. His name is Waraqa bin Nawfal, who also was a Jesus follower. And he listened to the story Muhammad was telling, and he told him, if I'm not mistaken, this is the same spirit that came down on Moses and on Jesus and other prophets. And if I'm not mistaken, you're the promised prophet for this nation, for the Arabs. And if you are persecuted while I'm around, I will defend you. Muhammad asked him, do you think I'm going to be persecuted? He said, always a prophet is persecuted by his own people. Unfortunately, Waraqa died, before the prophet moved to Medina, but he was a supporter. Does this answer your question, Michael?
It does. May I follow up?
Okay, please do.
In my master's degree work, I studied modern management theory, and there's a concept called situational leadership.
Okay.
So that a leader sees that one of his subordinates or one of his associates has better expertise than the main leader. That main leader should yield his leadership to that individual.
It's common sense.
Yes.
It's common sense.
But it's not always common sense that we see in everyday life.
So what's the question, Michael?
I just think it's all so consistent. I mean, what you were talking about here is so consistent with that.
Let me tell you another concept. That concept actually was attributed usually when modern management science talked about this concept. They were talking about Jesus, and that's servant leader. Mm-hmm. Servant leader is a concept that applies also to Muhammad. He was a true servant leader. When his wife Aisha, long after Khadija died, Prophet Muhammad married Aisha, and Aisha was younger than Khadija, who was older than the Prophet. And she was asked, how was the Prophet at home? She said, like any other man. He used to mend his clothes, clean his shoes, milk the goat, and look after the needs we have at home. So basically, he was a servant leader. He was teaching us to lead through serving. And he said, the leader of the people is their servant. So servant leadership apply in this case to Prophet Muhammad, but we have a gap between what I'm saying and what Muslims are doing today. They think of a servant as a lower value, lower person, and they look down on servanthood. I, for many years, called myself or signed my emails as servant. I still do that. And many people wonder, especially if they're Muslims, why are you calling yourself servant? Because God created me to love him, worship him, and to serve you. You, and you, and you, if each one.
Let me add to that.
If I don't serve you, I'm not doing what I was created to do on this earth. My purpose of being here is to be a servant.
Yes. Let me add, Safi, one of the kings called Tipu Sultan in the state of Mysore, which is part of India. He was the king, but he always signed servant of the people. He never signed king of Mysore. And that is such a great tradition among Muslims. Friends, you're listening to this program called Common Sense Islamic Values. And that program, it is all about how these values contribute for the common good of the societies. Today's value is equality or equity, and including gender equity and gender equality. And we have cited from the Quran, from Prophet sayings and experiences. We welcome any question we have. We got another 10 to 12 minutes left. So please feel free to ask any question.
Mike, this is Soraya. Okay. I see somebody else's hand up.
I said okay. You go first, and Soraya goes next.
No, please, you go ahead, Soraya.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm from Sri Lanka, Brother Safi. So, the debate on polygamy is raging because the nationalist racist government want to take away some of the Muslim personal laws. So it's a very difficult place for us. Yes, for justice, but then yes, for racist governments. How do you stand up to them? So anyway, my question is about polygamy. So one of the scholars in Sri Lanka says, as for polygamy, this is something that has been part of Muslim law for centuries, and it is in fact embedded in the Islamic faith. It must, however, be stated that this is not an arbitrary right given to a Muslim male. It comes with many conditions attached, including equal treatment of all 4 wives. It should be best described as a concession to human nature, a concession that seeks to eliminate vices so common in our society, such as prostitution, mistresses, brothels, along with other ill effects such as venereal diseases and destruction of the family. So the patriarchy, the men want to maintain this right to polygamy on these grounds that to eradicate prostitution and stuff like that. So my question to you is, would you please explain Surah 4:3? In my understanding, it's the surah referring to orphans and to manage their properties. Only it is under those grounds that men are allowed to marry 4 times. And also going back to what you said all morning, justice. Does it meet the standard of justice? And also the second question, how many Muslim countries have abolished polygamy?
The last part of your question, how many Muslim countries abolished what?
Polygamy.
Polygamy.
Well, actually, I personally know of one, which is Tunisia. But let's go back to your original question. Actually, the surah that our scholars depend on to say that men are allowed to marry 4 wives does not talk about rights of man or rights of women. It's talking about the right of the orphans. It's talking about how to best treat the orphans. And it's encouraging Muslims, if you want to take care of the orphans, in other words, by definition, and the Quran is talking about when a man dies and leaves behind a woman and children. Now, under certain circumstances, that would have been defined as tremendous hardship, because in the past, you don't have a man to protect you and to provide you with the livelihood. You're up the creek with no paddles, basically. You're in trouble. You have tremendous problems. So the Quran found a way to solve this problem by allowing Muslim men to take care of orphans. The way to keep the orphans close by and to give them love and understanding and to basically raise them is to have the mother with them. You can't have the mother and the children living with you unless you marry her. So, but for some reason, early on, our scholars interpreted all this to mean that the man is allowed to marry 4 women. Well, if all 4 comes with orphans, that'll be fine. But in this case, they are not marrying in order to adopt orphans. They are marrying for other purposes. I personally are married to 1 woman, and I don't intend to marry again. And I don't see any reason, truly, if we have, if the man and the woman have good understanding, that they should branch out, you know. As far as I'm concerned, this is not logical, it's not practicable, and is very harmful. So I think part of this revolution of Sharia that's moving forward now and spreading all over the Muslim world, people would look into this. If you don't have a reason to marry another woman, why do you want to marry? You know, you're destroying your present life, introducing something totally new that you cannot even predict what's going to do to your present life, and maybe ruining somebody else's life. So I am totally for marrying one woman. I see no reason in today's age for a man to go and marry more women, except his greed. You know, if people are justifying marrying more than one woman because they want to help, a victim of war, like if a man in the United States right now wants to marry an Afghani refugee because she has no other way to support herself, I might understand this. But I don't see any man moving forward saying that this is the reason for the marriage. We had the Syrian women in Lebanon came as refugees. And then we have the wealthy Arabs who came and visited those refugee camps. And anytime they see a woman they like, they offer her to marry her. You know, this is greed. This is taking advantage of a bad situation. It's something that Islam, the heart of Islam, the conscience of Islam, does not approve. So how those scholars allow it to happen, I don't know. If such a man asked me to perform the marriage ceremony for him, I will refuse. I will say no.
Agreed.
You want to marry her? I don't see any good reason for you to marry her.
Yeah.
Unless you show me good reasons, you're already married.
Yes.
Get the heck out of here and go back to your wife and try to
work with
but yeah. So I don't see any good reason.
We need to clone you. We need to clone you. Where have the community failed? Why can't the ulamas, the imams teach the community on Fridays without talking about how to take wuzu and, I mean, irrelevant things we discuss in a Jummah?
Yes. My sister, I need to write what you're saying theoretically is correct. Practically, what you need to do is teach the ulama, teach the scholars what is in your best interest. Look, God did not give them wisdom that he didn't give you or give me or give my ghost. Each one of us have similar brains and similar logic. So our scholars are still living in the 19th century or 18th century maybe. We need to put demand for, in my lecture, I talk about women in Somalia, for God's sake. Somali women are living in a civil war. They're living under tremendously harsh situation. Whoever has a rifle, automatic rifle, can force people to do whatever he wants. Yet those women are going out through Sharia, demanding more rights. If women in Sri Lanka, I've been to Sri Lanka twice. If women in Sri Lanka demand, not just Muslim women, women in general, demand equal rights, they will get it. They will get it.
It will take time. It will take
time. It's time for people to stand up for what they think it's their right. If we keep quiet about it, we will never get anything. And the situation will not change.
Kaiser Zama, your question, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Mike and Dr. Safi. Before I quickly ask this question, as I was late by 25 minutes, I wanted to just add a comment to the second question of, is it Suraya?
Suraya.
Suraya. Just wanted to add a comment because I learned through Dr. Zaki Badawi when I attended the Muslim College between 97 and 03, is Muslim law, marriage, divorce, and inheritance, that Pakistan is the other country which has somewhat restricted polygamy by having a clause in the 1961 Marriage Act that a man has to seek consent from his first or earlier wives to marry again. There are two reasons for that. One is that to prevent people from secretly marrying more than one wife without the earlier
consent.
wives
Without
knowing about
consent.
it. Without consent, yeah.
Yes.
So that has in a lot of cases, more than one marriages are restricted unless the wife consents to it. So
That's in Pakistan.
in Pakistan, yes,
Yes.
it is the 1961
Yes.
Marriage Act,
Yes.
1961.
In Tunisia, the law says no other marriage, one marriage.
Yes.
You marry to one person at a time. Now, hopefully, other women around the world will stand up for their rights. And some men will stand up with them. I will go down.
Me too.
If somebody is calling for this, I'll go down and stand up with them. I truly don't see any reason for it. And I personally think I know every word that's in the Quran as much as possible. I don't see any particular verse instructing us that it is allowed for men to marry 4 women. That verse that exists there is in relationship to orphans. It's talking about orphans and mothers of orphans, you know. So but scholars supported the status quo in Arabia at that time, and it spread all over the world.
Like Soraya said, it was patriarchy that has been carried forward. Now we are coming to conscience. We are regaining our consciousness and trying to follow the human rights that Quran gave.
Yes.
So we can take one more question and conclude the program.
May I ask my primary question?
Sure.
Dr. Safi may have covered this in the first 25 minutes. I was not here. My question is, Aisha Raziallahu Anha was the narrator of hadith, probably the highest number of hadith, or second highest. And I also learned that she used to teach the companions Islam, but she used to wear the full niqab when they were nearby. Now this is there is a general consensus. Sahih hadith is there to support this. How can the Taliban justify and what is their evidence that girls should not be educated?
Brother, they don't. I cited this hadith about Sayyida Aisha before you came, and I talked about it in some details because it's an important hadith. When at the beginning of Islam, a woman was teaching most men what Islam is all about, how come now they don't allow women to deliver khutbah or to sit down and teach, and they restrict her involvement in all religious activities in the mosque, you know? So anyway, basically Taliban don't have a leg to stand on. They have a culture. It's a Pashtun culture. And that Pashtun culture is fantastic for the Pashtun, but should not be called Islam. And Islam is the right of women. See, I mentioned also about women who consider their right to be educated to be an integral part of Islamic Sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ himself taught men and women at the mosque. So Taliban has no leg to stand on. They are absolutely and totally wrong on this issue, and they are giving Islam and Muslims a bad name. I did not comment on Taliban after they won after they kicked foreign forces out of Afghanistan. I wanted to wait and see what they will do, whether they're going to deliver what they promised the Qatari government or not. I found out today, or yesterday, I should say, I was talking to somebody in Afghanistan that they are not delivering what they promised. They are not living up to the promise about allowing women to seek education or to work. All women that work in government offices are not allowed to resume their work right now. So they didn't deliver. They are not delivering what they're promised to deliver, and this is not acceptable at all. They call themselves Muslims, but they think they're the only Muslims on planet Earth. They don't know that the whole world is watching us. The whole world is watching what Taliban is doing and claiming this is Islam. So when I talk about Islam to some American congressman or so, he gives me the example of Taliban. Well, that's not fair. They are not representing me,
Yes.
nor representing the Prophet, nor representing Quran. They're representing the Wahhabi, Deobandi teachings that are no longer practicable. So this is simply what it is. They don't represent us, I don't think.
Thank you very much for that.
Well, let's, if nobody has any other question, those who have not asked, we can conclude the program. Roxana, you have any question? Brother Haitham Al-Khatib, you have any question?
Yes, I do have one last question, please. It might be the last question in this session. Some people, the students, in fact, they ask me sometimes about the inheritance issue.
Yes.
Dr. Safi said that man is have the responsibility of providing for the house. Basically, that's how the balance works there. But some students ask me sometimes, saying also the woman in these days, many women work and they do provide for the family. So does that still hold the share of the inheritance?
Brother Haytham, Muslims are not all the same, and circumstances in various Muslim countries are not the same. In a place where it is the obligation of the male to provide for his wife and his children, this situation still stands. In places where women and men are together working and raising a family together, they need to have togetherness in the decision-making process. And maybe if we have many of those people in a certain geographical area, they can demand from their scholars that the inheritance be amended, or a particular hadith need to be amended. La wasiyyata liwarith. That single hadith prevent me, for instance, from leaving a will giving my daughter an equal share to her brother. Without that hadith in place, I can have a will, because the Quran says the inheritance will be distributed min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn, after a will that he drew or a loan that he has to pay. So when someone dies, first they should take in consideration what will he left, and then they should look at what loans he owes, and then they distribute the rest. Now, I can distribute my wealth in my lifetime, and no one has anything to say about that. I can give my daughter in my lifetime any percentage of my wealth I want. That's up to me. And I'm only responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this. But if I want to leave it in a will, and I die before I distribute it, then it's up to the law that is prevailing at that time in the geographical area we are talking about. That will take precedent. People can change a lot of things if they get together and
Indeed.
decide they need the change.
Indeed. Well, friends, we will conclude the program. You can find this video on YouTube. Just go type Muslims together. You will get it now. You can also type Safi Kaskas. You will not only see this video, but all the other videos of him. Or you can type my name and you will find similar videos. Thank you very much for joining us. Today's value was the equity or equality in Islam, both gender and regular. Now, Brother Safi, you want to say a short dua and we conclude the program?
Yes, indeed. Oh Allah, thank you for bringing us together and for the privilege you granted me to address these brothers and sisters. Oh Allah, please grant us peace and serenity and help us to overcome our own selfishness in order to dedicate ourselves to serve others. Help those who are suffering, give them patience and perseverance. Glory to you, O Allah, and praise. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship but you. I seek your forgiveness and repent to you. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Thank you very much, brother.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.